And okay, so as I said, we're going to look at the sugya in Masechet Bava Batra in the Talmud, but I wanted to start with the Mishnah because when we look at in the full chapter of the Mishnah, we understand the context of where did the Mishnaic rabbis, where did they file a specific halacha? So, and where did they file that whole chapter? So, Bava Batra literally means the last gate, the third door, or the third section, and it's part of a larger tractate that used to be called Masechet Nezikim, the laws, the tractate of damages, but it was so long that it was divided into three gates: Bava Kama, the first gate; Bava Matziah, the middle gate; and Bava Batra, the last gate. In the last one, each one of them contains 10 chapters, and Bava Batra starts with the issues of laws of neighbors. It is in the first chapter, and this in terms of what is agreed, what are the agreed uses between neighbors, and it continues also into the second chapter, the damages that neighbors could cause each other, what is allowed, what is not allowed within one's property, and whether a neighbor is allowed to protest and say, you could do this and you cannot do that. Then it goes in the following chapters of Batra. It goes into the laws of how does one establish ownership over a real estate property, and then over establishing ownership for all other objects, including animals and slaves at the time. And the last part of the tractate, it deals with inheritance. So this is the second chapter that deals with damages, with the laws of damages, and that's why it's interesting to see the whole chapter, because at a certain point the Mishnah speaks about what we call today zoning, and that idea of commercial zone and residential zone is already mentioned in the Mishnah. We'll see how the Mishnah understood the concept and where the Talmud took it to. So we start with the laws of damages here. So let's start with the. I did the Nikud today. I hope it's pretty good. Let's read there. Mishnah Aleph. Anyone who wants to read? Rebecca, okay.
I made it bigger on my other screen, so I'm just going to click over.
Okay.
Okay. Lo yachpor adam bor samuch lavoro shel chaviro velo shiach velo me'ara velo amat hamayim velo nivrechet kofsin ele im kain hirchik mikotel havero שלושה טפחים וסד וסיד מרחיקים את הגפת ואת הזבל ואת המלח ואת הסיד ואת הסלעים מחוטלו של חברו שלושה טפחים וסד וסיד מרחיקים את הזרעים את המחרשה ואת מי רגליים מן הכותל שלושה טפחים ומרחיקין את הרחיים שלושה מן
שכב
השכב שהן 4 מן הרכב ואת התנור שלושה מן הכלי שהן 4 מן הספק.
Okay, so the interesting thing about this Mishnah and the whole chapter is this is one of the chapters in Mishnah where we get the what is called the realia, a window into the life of people in the time of the Mishnah, because they speak about all these little details that you find around the house. We understand like how people used to live. So here we talk about that laws of damages, laws of properties. The lo yahpor adam bor samuch leboro shel havero. One is not allowed to to dig a water well, right, next to a water well that belongs to another person, to his neighbor's well, nor can he dig a shiah, which the rabbis in the Talmud explain as a longer, narrow well that might be. It's not from the word siyah. Siyah is a bush with sin.
Yeah, but that's a bush.
Right, but with a sheen, it's like the Hebrew word, the modern Hebrew word shuha, which is a foxhole. So it's maybe a horizontal, not horizontal, more diagonal, or perpendicular to the. Instead of being perpendicular to the surface, it's sort of diagonal, and that was another way of storing water for certain purposes. Same thing with the cave. Amat Hamayim is an aqueduct, and Nevrechet Kofsin is a laundry pool. Now, all these you cannot do next to your neighbor's property unless you remove it from the wall 3 handbreadths and you cover it with lime.
Lime.
Yes, with lime. Yeah, you have the with plaster. So here we have the translation. They call it plaster here. Now all these things, the pit, the ditch, the cave, the irrigation pool, the laundry pool, all these things can cause damage or lasting damage to the neighbor's pool. The Talmud has a problem with the statement that it has to be away from the wall. So they understand that the all these different types of diggings are next to a wall, they visualize a well on one side, a wall in the middle, and a well on the other side. But it seems that the pshat of the Mishnah suggests that when we hear later on, it will speak about kotel as the wall that separates, that divides the two properties. But this kotel, refers to the wall of the well. So it could be in a field, could be in an open field or an open space. But if your neighbor dug a well, you have to make sure that you dig a well, that the thickness of the ground between the width of the ground between the two wells is at least 3 handbreadths, and that in order to avoid a weakening of the ground or maybe liquids seeping through the walls into each side, and that's why it says Vesad Basid. There's a famous statement in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. I'll just type here the text of this praise. The rabbis, I think Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, said about one of his talmidim that he's a בור סוד שאינו מאבד טיפה. This is in Pirkei Avot. I'm going to erase it. בור סוד שאינו מאבד טיפה. A lot of people read this as בור סיד שאינו מאבד טיפה, as meaning a pit filled with lime which doesn't lose a drop. But it's not the right reading. The right reading is בור סוד, meaning it's a well whose walls were covered with lime. Lime served as an insulating agent to make sure that the water do not go through the walls. So the idea of בור סוד is this well that contains all its liquids and doesn't lose even one drop. So this is the same thing that we see here. Yes.
I have a question. So this brings to mind a situation that's extremely contemporary. Houses are often built close to each other in many neighborhoods, as are mine, and some of us actually live in apartments or townhomes that are directly that share walls. So if my neighbor is outside smoking a cigarette, and the smoke is coming into my yard, and I have to breathe it, that's an example of where there is no insulating agent.
Right.
Where what they're doing is getting into my property.
Right.
and it would be in violation. I mean, in other words, we could begin to develop maybe halacha based on this concept,
Right.
which I'm sure has been done.
Right. But I mean, it sounds very contemporary, but it's actually so.
Well, no, it's ancient. I'm just giving a contemporary example.
I know, but it's really ancient. It's fundamental because they did have things like that in the past. Only they didn't smoke cigarettes. They smoked meat or clothes or other things. So what if your neighbor decides to become, do it yourself in everything, and is smoking salmon, smoking?
Well, it's funny that you say that because that is actually, I do have a neighbor who smokes meat. He has a smoker, and he smokes meat. He doesn't do it every day though. It's a couple times a year. They'll do it for parties,
Right.
and stuff. So it's okay. That's so infrequent. It's not
Right.
troubling.
Infrequent, but if he makes it into a business and you have it always in your backyard, it might become a hazard. So we'll see later on. Here, I think, where is it? Shniya. Let me see if. No, this is in the Talmud actually. The Talmud speaks about the damages of smoke or something like that. And that is something that they bring. Even though what Rebecca just read, we read about the tanur, the oven, but it's not clear. The Talmud discusses that if the damage of an oven is the damage of the smoke or foot traffic or something, because all these things that are mentioned right now in this Mishnah are things that cause damage to the ground. Well, later on we'll see that that we talk about fire hazard, smoke hazard, breathing hazard. All these things are already mentioned either in the Mishnah or the Talmud. But I think that this is a very interesting. With the example of a cigarette is an interesting example because this is sort of a walking hazard, meaning that the neighbor, you could ask him to move further into the street. And as a matter of fact, I think that this has become the law in New York, where you're not allowed to smoke near the entrance of buildings, because when they made the law of not smoking in public facilities, what you would see, you would go downtown New York, you walk in the city during lunchtime, and at every corner by the entrance of the building, you have 20 or 30 people smoking. So you have to go through a cloud of smoke to get into the smoke-free zone. So
Right.
they made this illegal, and I actually saw in one airport a smoking box that I don't know where anyone would put himself in that.
Really?
I think it was in Heathrow in London, where like it's a transparent box that that has its own ventilation system, and people go inside and they smoke in that. I don't know why you would want to walk out of there smelling like a wet ashtray. But
One more question. Chavero. Is Chavero normally, is it understood in this context as a fellow Jew, or it could be a non-Jew as well?
Interesting. Usually it's a fellow Jew, but we know that if there were situations like that, I mean, just because people usually lived in a segregated neighborhood, Jews and non-Jews did not live next to each other, and if they did, the rabbis did not want to acknowledge it in the Mishnah, in the Talmud. There's already discussion about that. They interpret a lot of halachot as stemming from situations where people live in shared neighborhoods. But here we're talking basically about a Jew. Later on, we could the halakha developed separately regarding justice as something that we must deliver to both Jews and non-Jews. So if that would be, I assume that if there would be a damage lawsuit that comes from a non-Jew to a Jew, then the rabbis would try to deal with it. If the non-Jew is willing to subject himself to Jewish law, they would deal with it fairly. So okay, so this is one set of things ditches or pits that contain water, or in the case of the Nivechet Kovsim, the laundry pool, it might even contain chemicals, strong chemicals. They actually used, the Talmud mentioned that they actually used dog urine to bleach clothes, and then of course they would have to wash them again for the smell. But this is what they used. Then they speak about the leftover from olive makings, the olive pulp, and the fertilizer, salt, lime. This is when you have the lime concentrated in one place, and rocks from the wall of your neighbor. All these things could cause weakening of the ground there, so you have to remove them. מרחיקים את הזרעים ואת המחרשה ואת מי הרגליים מן הכותל 3 טפחים. Same thing goes about arable, what we call arable land, the land that you could plow, that you should leave 3 tfahim from the wall, meaning you're not going to plant and to sow all the way to the wall. You have to leave room. In this case, we're still not talking about roots going underground, because those zaraim are wheat and vegetables that don't go deep, don't cause damage. We'll talk later about a tree, but this is about people walking around. So even the idea of walking very constantly, if you happen to pass next to your neighbor's wall, it's one thing. But if it becomes a constant practice, your neighbor could complain that you are destroying or that you are weakening the foundations of his wall. Mei raglaim is urine. So people used to relieve themselves by the wall, and they say you cannot do it next to your friend's wall because it could cause damage. Finally, we talk about 2 big household items. Actually, not household; those are the things that used to be outside. One is the millstones, which are called. So the term is rehaim. That refers to both stones, and the stones are called separately shechev, from the word shachav. This is the lower stone, and rechev is from the word rachav, to mount or to ride, which is the upper stone. The lower stone was usually wider than the upper stone, therefore it's 3 handbreadths away from the lower one, but 4 if you measure it from the upper one. The Talmud will go into a discussion of why do you have to tell me 3 from the lower one, 4 from the upper one, but not always you could derive exact meaning from the Mishnah. Sometimes the Mishnah does state the obvious, and the idea of, again here, not putting your millstone right next to your neighbor's door, so neighbor's wall. So in this case, it's interesting when you talk about Zraim. I'm thinking of a contemporary example that if there's a wall between your lawn and your neighbor's lawn, he cannot mow the lawn all the way to the wall. He has to leave some room where it doesn't go with this heavy machinery, unless you use a trimmer. So you actually have it in an interesting way. The rights of the neighbors extend into the territory of their neighbor, and they can prevent someone from doing actions in his property that could damage your property. Right? Do we have similar? I assume that there were similarities in today's law, that one cannot claim I'm doing whatever damage or whatever thing that I'm doing in the privacy of my home. If other people are damaged by it, we can ask him to stop that. And there will be implications even when we talk about the internet or anything that when a person claims I'm within certain confinements that are all mine, and I'm not entering into your domain, but the other side says yes, but the effects or the impact of what you're doing is causing me harm and damage. And according to that, we see that the the Mishnah recognizes that you have a right to speak up. Okay. So, the same thing goes for the tanur, the oven, shlosha mina kali or mina kulya. That's clear how to read that. We see like the basis of the oven was narrower than the upper part of the oven. Maybe that was the way to assure that it's not too much heat hits the ground, or if it's the other way around, the top, the kali would be that is a possibility. The kali used to the kali barak. They already had at the time of the Mishnah the idea of if you have something metallic that you want to have a lightning rod. We know that there were lightning rods on top of the temple called kali barak. Kali from the word kele, to imprison. So those are the ones that capture the barak. So all these things could cause damage to the neighbor's wall. Okay. Lo ya'amid adam. Any comments about this Mishnah? No, we're good. Okay.
No, it's just very. I mean, it's very applicable there. I mean, it sets off. Of this, I can think of a million cases today.
Yes, there are.
Where I want to apply this concept.
No doubt, we have a lot of things. One second. We have a lot of things that are similar in modern time. Actually, it's basically what we see here are a lot of examples. Sorry, just switch his chair. A lot of examples of details that are actually one. This is part of the casuistic phrasing of the Mishnah, where we go into a lot of details. You could have said in one thing, you cannot put a hazard next to your friend's wall, but they didn't have that many examples, so they go through the list of what is common in their day, and they put it out there. But you're right. There will be. What if, for example, you have? I'll give you another example. You have a shared driveway, right? It's like in a townhouse. Right? There's a driveway that's shared by two neighbors, and I decide, no, one day I'm going to park my truck there, or my cement mixer. I managed to fit it into the driveway. My neighbor says, every time you go on this, the cracks going through my my part, or the whole house is shaking. And I say, what do you want? I'm doing, this is my property. I can do whatever I want in my property. Or what about people playing? Can you buy a drum set to your kids or you play the drums if you live in an apartment, in a building, or in a townhouse? We have that. I mean, my wife plays piano, and I'm sure the neighbors hear it, but they don't complain because we hear the flute that they're playing at 11:30 p.m. So a part of it, this is not irreversible damage. There are different There are different categories. You could say there's damage. There's mental damage, emotional damage, a noise hazard, or disturbance. There's a question of mutual agreement. I'll do this, you'll do that. So all these things really play a role, but it just shows us how the rabbis were aware of all these intricate issues, and they were taking care of them.
Yeah, well, I'll give you. Right now, my parents, their house is in a neighborhood where the house immediately to the right and the house immediately to the left are undergoing major construction. Basically, they're tear downs and they're rebuilding. So at the very same time, on both sides, they have major construction going on in their house. And there's noise, obviously, there's dirt, there's cracking from whatever's going on will crack cement or crack concrete in my parents' house or around my parents' house. It's a nightmare for them.
Right. So does anyone did they offer to buy them out or something like that?
No, they're two totally different people. It's just coincidentally that they're doing the construction at the same time. Two completely different parties, homeowners. But now is when they happen to be doing the construction.
So I wonder if let's say they decide to somehow get compensation? Can they? Is there any legal process to say here is or they have to show visible damage that is caused by that?
Yeah, they would have to show visible damage. The construction companies have to take the proper precautions to try to prevent the damage. They have to put up screens to try to minimize the dust that flies around, fences with screens on them. So they have to take precautions. They can only do building at certain hours of the day. So they came the other day. My mother told me they came at 6:30 to start building, and she called City Hall, and they were both cited with fines for doing that. So she's like the watchdog. She knows every code.
No, she's right, because we've had that people working at 6:30 a.m. or the lawnmower can only come on Shabbat. Where any other day if you come at 7:30 everybody's up and running, but Shabbat is the quietest day in the neighborhood. So really, we have but this situation of people building right next door to you, or sometimes you have nothing, nothing to fight against. How do you control that? That's but I think part of the problem is that, or not part of the problem. This is probably why a lot of real estate developers are pushing themselves into the legislative branch, because this is where they can protect their rights. Not only here, everywhere around the world, or the lobbyists. Right. I know of situations where developers sit with their friends in City Hall and say, "We're going to develop this neighborhood. We're going to build this thing here," but the residents to the right and to the left are against it because of the noise, because of that, whatever. They say, okay, you'll promise them a playground, right? Public spaces. So they invite the people from the other neighborhood and they say, this is what we're going to do. We promise that we're going to give you public spaces and trees and a playground and all that. And so, okay, great. So we benefit from your development. We're willing to waive our rights, whatever. And even if they sign a contract, 3 years later, the project goes up, and the promised playground is one slide and one tree. But now, what are you going? Right? They delivered on their promise as if it were, and there's nothing the other people could do. So this is really a bad situation. But I would assume that according to the Talmud, if you wanted to be, if you really wanted to adhere to the law of the Talmud, you would have said that in a case like that, the neighbor who wants to build right next door to you to renovate must compensate you for all damages. I mean, if you have the right to halt construction. I mean, you don't want to be the mean neighbor who doesn't let other people do what they have to do, but you have to understand that constant noise is a hazard. I mean, it causes damage. The noise, the dust, the dirt. So how do you bring that into legislation? This is something that the Torah probably would have worked on, to say maybe you are obligated to offer temporary residence for these people until you end construction in a protected place with at least the same life quality that they have. I mean, you have to negotiate before you start building, and not just put some kind of protectors that are not really functioning.
Right. But unfortunately, municipalities normally favor the businesses.
Of course, because it generates money for them, and it attracts new people and new developers and work. So exactly, this is where the interest, we have interest group where the interests of the residents are not always the interests of the developers or the administrators. It's exactly the problem. Okay, so Mishnah Bet. Who will read this one?
You want somebody to read?
Yeah.
Okay, I can read. לא יעמיד אדם הנור בתוך הבית, אלא אם כן יש על גובה 4 אמות, היה מעמידו בעלייה, צריך שיהיה Tav. Well, you didn't put any sentence endings in here.
Okay.
Ma'aziva, שלושה טפחים, ובקרה טפח, ואם חיזיק, משלם מה שהזיק. רבי שמעון אומר, לא אמרו כל השיעורים האלו, אלא שאם הזיק פטור מלשלם.
Okay. So yeah, these are some strange terms here. Now we're talking about a very common form of living in the time of the Talmud, of the Mishnah, which is Bait Va'aliyah, which we call today duplex, that you had a 2-floor house where people lived, different families lived in the lower floor and the upper floor. So now, and the way the houses were built, mostly of clay, sometimes of stones, and the ceiling was made by putting long wooden beams and wooden plates and filling them in between with plaster and then more beams on top. So it's basically wooden plaster which divides the 2 floors. So obviously you can't put too much weight in the 2nd floor. So the Mishnah says that you cannot put an oven in the 1st floor because of the here it's about the heat. It's not the smoke. Mostly it's the heat that could and a possible fire hazard. It has to have gova arba amot. This is interesting. This is like maybe the first fire code that we have, that you have to have the distance from the top of the oven to the ceiling at least 4 feet, because closer than that, the ceiling could catch fire. Remember, it's a wooden ceiling. So within the laws of damages, we also read the fire code of how do you build an oven in the house. But if one built an oven in the 2nd floor, which was not common, when you had another family living upstairs, they might have chosen to have an oven upstairs. Otherwise, people would want to have it in the ground floor. And as a matter of fact, most people would have the oven outside. You see, you cannot build an oven in the house unless you have 4 feet on above. Not everybody had houses with high ceilings like that, so they would rather put the oven outside. And the oven was unlike our ovens, which we turn on and off at will, and it will take 20 minutes, 25 minutes for it to reach its desired temperature. It was much easier back then to leave the oven running at all time. You feed it with coal, and you leave the coals burning at the bottom. When you need a higher flame, you fan the flames and you get higher heat. But basically, it was always hot. If you have been to the Middle East or other places where people still use ovens like that, you realize this is how the ovens function. So you usually don't want to have this kind of appliance in the house. So, but if you do it in the house, you have to have a high ceiling. If you do it in the 2nd floor, which is even rarer, you have to have a 3 handbreadth thick floor, because the heat that the oven generates could melt or could cause, through induction, could cause the wood to burn. So it has to be a thick enough layer between the 2 floors. Uvakira tefah. Kira is a smaller oven, and for the kira, one tefah is enough. Ma'aziva, this word, that's the ceiling. That's the wooden beams with plaster. What happens if, despite all the cautionary measures, there was some damage? Imizik, meshalem mashizik. If he caused damage, he has to pay for the damages. Rabbi Shimon Omer. By the way, I did a nikud. I wanted to write Ribi and not Rabbi, because this is how the Sephardic pronunciation is, Ribi. But then I have to change every word not using what's in the dictionary, so I just stuck with the Rabbi. But we say Rabbi Shimon Omer, לא אמרו כל השורין האלו, אלא שאם הזיק פטור מלשלם. Rabbi Shimon says, he argues, he says, the fire code was created to absolve you of responsibility. To say, I mean, unless we find criminal neglect, which is a concept that we find, earlier Masechet Bava Metzia called Adam, Mu'ad Le'olam, that if there's a potential for danger, even if you did something not deliberately, you're still responsible. But Rabbi Shimon says, in this case, if you've operated exactly the way the Mishnah told you to operate, and you left the right space between the oven and the ceiling, and then something happened despite all that, it's not your responsibility. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. The other opinion that says that he has to pay no matter what probably follows this concept of Adam Mu'ad Le'olam, that we are always responsible. A human being is always responsible. This comes from the difference between an ox and in a goring ox, you have two types of oxen, two different statuses. One is shortam, meaning what we call it an innocent or a righteous ox who has never gored before, and the other one is shor mu'ad, an ox that did gore people in the past, and therefore he's now he's an habitual offender. So there's one opinion in the Talmud which we follow, which is Adam Mu'ad Le'olam. Adam, a human being, is always considered an offender, meaning that the only time when we will be absolved of responsibility is when we had zero control of the situation, where it was really honest. But for example, in this case, the first opinion in the Mishnah will claim that even though you were giving the leeway of the 4 feet or above or 3 handbreadths below, you still have to be vigilant. You still have to stand there and supervise the oven. It does not absolve you from paying. So similarly, today, if we want to apply that, if someone, I would say that today the halacha would go with Rabbi Shimon, because if someone installed, let's say, a machine in the house, and he followed all the regulations, like let's say a boiler, a water boiler, right? He installed it correctly and everything was done right, and for some reason something happened and the place caught on fire. One would not expect the owner to constantly check on the boiler, even though it's a good idea to do that. But it seems to me that in a case like that, if he installed everything properly and there was no reason for concern, then either the company which installed the boiler or made the boiler would be responsible, or that no one would be responsible. They would say it's an act of God, but the owner or the person who put it there would not be responsible. Is it correct? You think?
Yeah, that's normally the case. I mean, I think similarly there's a concept that one cannot waive negligence.
Yeah, that would right. That would probably be what the Mishnah says, Adam Mu'ad Le'olam. So the extreme case of that would be, let's say, unless you find the other Adam, the other human being, who created, who caused the damage. So, for example, if I go to sleep in my dorm, right, college dorm, and before I go to sleep, I see that there are, let's say, cups on the floor, and I don't remove them, and I go to sleep, and then I wake up in the middle of the night and step on them and break them, right? I cannot claim that I was, or I rolled out of bed and broke them. I cannot say that I was unaware of my actions because I was sleeping or if I was somnambulant. People, the law would say you should have known, because when you were still conscious, when you were still awake, you saw those cups and you didn't move them. But if I went to sleep and they weren't there, and then one of my friends as a prank came and put them there, and then I found them, then I would say I'm really not responsible because I was not in a state of awareness where I could see what is happening. But in that case, my friend who put him there, he will be the one would be charged. Okay, so we go to Mishnah Gimel. Buki, you want to read this one? Lo yifta. What?
Yeah, I can read it.
Okay.
לא יפתח אדם חנות של נחתומין ושל צבעין תחת אוצרו של חברו, ולא רפת בקר באמת ביין התירו, אבל לא רפת בקר חנות שבחצר, יכול למחלות בידו, ולומר לו, איני יכול לישון מכל הנכנסים ומכל היוצאים עושה כלים. Hold on a second, my computer is freaked out. Okay. עושה כלים, יוצר ומוכר בתוך השוק, אבל אינו יכול למחות בידו, ולומר לו, איני יכול לישון ולא מכל הפטיש ולא מכל הרחיים ולא מכל התינוקות.
Okay. So now here we move into a new. We're sort of moving in a logical pattern from horizontal neighbors to now vertical neighbors. Right here we spoke about the first floor, the ground floor, and the second floor. But now, and we move also from the private realm to the commercial one, and here we speak about lo yiftach adam chanut shel nachtomim v'shel tzaba'im tachat otzaro shel chavero. So otzar in modern Hebrew means treasure, but in the rabbinical Hebrew it means a granary. This is where you store wheat. Now, what is a hanut shel nachtomim? Nachtom is a commercial baker. Tzaba is a what do you call fabric dyer. Is there a word tinterer? No. In Spanish you say tintorero. So a fabric dyer. So the tzabain, both these professions require extreme heat. If you're a commercial baker, your oven is running all day, and if you're a tzaba, what the main work of a dye maker was to boil the first water with the dye, and then boil the wool in the dye until it fully absorbed it. So they generate a lot of heat and humidity, which is not right, which is not good for the wheat. Velo refet bakar. Similarly, the one cannot build a pen for cattle under the granary of his neighbor. Meaning, so if I don't know how common was that to have a 2 floors granary, but this I guess is the idea of repurposing of can you take a space that was meant for a certain purpose and repurpose it and make it for a different one. So in this case, if it was a granary, probably originally was meant to be a granary on both floors, but now we want to change it to make a bakery or a dye factory or a cattle pen, and all these are not allowed. It's not clear what would be the problem with the cattle pen. Is it the noise? Is it the smell? Or it could be also the humidity, just as the baker and the dye maker can create a lot of heat and humidity, which is not good for the grain. So also cows, all concentrated in one place. The fertilizer can cause that. Maybe they're aware of somehow, maybe consciously, subconsciously, of the, that cow's manure could trap methane and methane gas, which is a greenhouse gas. So maybe they knew that it's not it's detrimental to the wheat. Now here is an interesting statement in the Mishnah. Be'emet bayayin itiru, aval lo refet bakar. Truly, they allowed to have wine there, but not a cattle pen. So this is I'm saying it's a strange statement because here this is the moments, some random moments the rare moments in the Mishnah where we sort of like have a window into the process of the writing of the Mishnah, because this is like a dialogue. It's like if someone is reciting this Mishnah and someone stops me and says, wait a second, how can you tell me that you cannot have those things where I have learned that you could do yain, you could open a wine pressing facility under the granary of your neighbor, and the other person answers be'emet bayayin itiru aval lo refet bakar. You're right, they did allow that, but they did not allow to open a cattle ranch right under the granary of the other. So what would have been the argument of the person who brings up this allowance of making the wine pressing facility? He would say maybe he thought that the problem was that the ground is shaking when the cows come in. The ground is shaking. Maybe it's not good to revel or to move the grains around. Maybe they need to be to sit in a certain way. And he said the same way with when you have a wine pressing facility, there will be a lot of movement or shaking, or maybe it is the humidity. We are not clear, but in any case, that is very, very important to look at as a window into the editing of the Mishnah, because we are usually taught that the Mishnah was very carefully edited by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, and that he removed all redundancies, all repetitions, and that it is legally phrased in the way that you would write a legal codex. But here we have kind of recording of a conversation. Again, the Tanakama, the first Tana says, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that, and then someone stops and says, wait, what about wine? I know that wine is okay, so why not those things? And the person who recited the Mishnah says, Be'emet bayayin itiru. Yeah, you're right, this was allowed, aval lo refet bakar. So we see that kind of the dynamics of the Mishnah, which, by the way, is another comment. It's very, very important to keep in mind when we read the Mishnah and we read the Talmud, that there are different types of discussions in the Mishnah. Either we have an edited summary of different opinions, like we had in the previous Mishnah, don't do this, but if you cause damage, this is what you do, and Rabbi Shimon argues. And sometimes we have a window, like I said, into the editing process where you have this statement, be'emet bayayin itiru, or b'mei dvarim amurim, what are we talking about, or mahu, this and that. For example, in the first Mishnah in Kiddushin, it says, Haisha niknet bechesef or b'shvei kesef. A woman is purchased with money and the equivalent of money, and then the Mishnah says, bekesef kama, how much is kesef? And the answer, hard with this kind of coin. The next generations comes and ask, what is this kind of coin, because we don't have it anymore, and they specify it with the measurement of silver. This is another sort of like format that we have in the Mishnah. And sometimes we have in the Mishnah an actual recording of the discussion in the Bet Midrash. When you read, Rabbi Akiva said ABC, Rabbi Shimon told him, how can you say that? And then Rabbi Tarfon interferes. So we have almost a verbatim recording of what happened in the Bet Midrash. Meanwhile, in the Talmud, you could see, like the article I sent today about meat and dairy, and the Talmudic Sugya in Hulin Daf Kufei Amud Bet, is you will have rabbis from the 3rd, 5th, 4th, and back 3rd century talking to each other, when they don't talk to each other, but there's a later editor who would say, it would start like that. The rabbi from the 3rd century said A. how is it possible the rabbi from the 5th century said differently? No, they must agree on what the rabbi of the 4th century said. Meaning we have this kind of all the material being thrown together because it relates to the same topic, but there's no editing in terms of the logical sequence of ideas or the chronological order of the authors of the different statements. So this is an important thing to point out, the way it is phrased, be'emet, be'ayin itiru, aval lo refet bakar. That's the end of Mishnah Gimel. Let's stop here, and we'll